I'd like to separate sin and temptation. And that's what's at the core of this passage, which has just been read from Luke chapter 4. And we need to separate temptation from sin, because sometimes when we hear the word temptation, we often see this little picture, the little golem, as it were, slimy creature, from The Hobbit, or maybe with a fork on the shoulder, sitting here and saying to us, told you, or naughty, and all the various things that maybe grandma or great-grandma told us about the devil. And we need to be able to separate the issues of temptation, which actually have got very little to do with the little golem on your shoulder, and sin. But maybe first, let's just get in perspective, who is this devil? Because Luke and the other gospel writers record that Jesus went into the wilderness and then the devil, or Satan, appeared and tempted him. So, a number of names. We call him, and I guess we call him because in the Hebrew scriptures, we call the important people him, but I guess it could be her as well. The devil, or the evil one, or the angel of darkness, or Satan, or the tempter. But the important thing is that this evil one, is one to whom God gives power by allowing this one to be the tempter. If you look at the beginning of Job, the book just before the Psalms, and you look in Job chapter 1 and verse 12, then you'll see this rather descriptive picture of all the angels of God coming to meet with God. And the writer says, and with them came Satan, the fallen angel, as it were. And there's this discussion between God and the devil about Job, because this is the book of temptation and what happens when we hold fast to God. Then God says to the devil, all that Job has is in your power. Only you may not touch his life. And then Satan departs from God's presence. It's an important thing for us to know when we're thinking about sin and temptation and the devil, because God always remains God, and the evil one is subject to the power of God and can withdraw the power which the evil one has, but doesn't, because that would remove choice from us. So that's why we can have hope as God's people. We can hope that we can be delivered, that we can be saved, because God is God and the devil is not. Remember that there are two main movements in the spiritual life. Really, only two. Movement away from God and movement towards God. And so all our actions in the spiritual life either move us closer to God or they move us further away from God. Temptation is temptation. Temptation is not sin. Temptation are the things which, in our minds, maybe the things in front of us that life presents us with, things we encounter, the things we do sometimes, which have the potential to draw us away from God, move us away from God. And they have the potential to do that because we do not have to respond to temptation. That's where choice comes in. Sin is sin and not temptation. And sin might be, well, there's a whole sermon in itself, or a series of them. Sin might be the things that we think, the things that we do, the things that we say, the things that we leave undone, which is always an interesting one. And that's why it's in the confession that we make each time we're together. But the things which draw us away from the love of God and separate us from God. And they're always our choice. So temptation is temptation. Sin is sin. And so it's good to know for ourselves what's going on in the mind, or what's going on in our actions, or our lack of action, which lead us away from God. And the things that we think, and the things that we say, and the things that we do, which lead us towards God. Then there's the setting in which this gospel is written, and it's called the wilderness or the desert. What is that? It's the place to which we go sometimes, maybe deliberately, maybe not deliberately, but the place where we can be dealt with by God, where we can consider, where we can pray, where we can go through the ups and downs, sort out the issues, wrestle with the issues of life and of temptation. It's, if you like, a place of formation, the desert or the wilderness in spiritual terms. And it's sometimes called the desert because often when we're in that space, which we can choose or which we find ourselves in, it can be a place of dryness, or it can be a place without lots of resources. So we feel as if we are left to our own and left to struggle on our own, as it were, so that we can learn to rely on God and then learn the lessons that we need to learn. Does that make sense about wilderness? Right? We've experienced it. We've been in desert places. We sometimes choose them and don't know them. And sometimes God allows us or even puts us in them. And they're the places to consider. And this 40 days of Lent, as it were, that we have, that's why Lent always starts with this passage of temptation. Because, if you like, it's the place where we share as much as we can, because we can't really share it. The place where we share the wilderness of Jesus. And we examine and re-examine so that we can come fresh and renewed to Easter. We were saying that last week. And then, lastly, by way of definitions, this passage refers to 40 days, as it were. And in Bible language, that means it's a lengthy period of time. It's a substantial period of time. It's like 40 years in the desert for the people of Israel. It's a time when you really feel, because it's long enough, that you will be going through difficult times. And we replicate that in a whole lot of ways. 40 days of Lent, for example. And if you've ever participated in the big fasts that Christian people have around the world, you may have even participated in some way in a 40-day fast. Does that make sense? Right? There's some definitions. But today, let's look at what these temptations of Jesus in the wilderness represent. Because it may be difficult to say that these are literal things that are happening. But of course, in our minds, they are there so that we can see the story and then say, what is it that these temptations stand for, really? The first is, which you see in verse 3, is Jesus is hungry, and the evil one says to him, well, you're God after all. Command these stones to become bread. It's the temptation around how good we look and what makes us relevant in the world. And what he is saying, the evil one is saying to Jesus is, look good, because this will make you look amazing. For most of us, our demonstration of success is an important thing. Maybe we learn that by the end of life it's not as important as we thought. But we want, most of us, to look good. We want to tell the best story. We want to show that, like the other successful things of the world, we can be part of that. Because that's what sells my product, after all. How often do I not want All Saints to be the place where amazing things happen? Mm-hmm. Where, oh God, I might say, if only there were a little more of turning these stones to bread regularly, please God, a lot, at All Saints. Then the people would come and say, wow, come and look, come and see what happens there. Healings, conversions, miracles, the best, the successful. As a priest, I've had to learn something about coming from a very large diocese in another part of the Anglican Communion to a fairly small rural diocese, and where all the churches are really small, family-sized churches, Anglican churches. We might have one in every town in this diocese and in northern Alberta, which we do, but they are mostly small. And it's important maybe not to compete or to look good or to look bigger. And often I draw you to look at the website, see what's on the website, huh? Because the temptation would be to say, wow, look at All Saints website, man, it's on the ball, there's good stuff there. Or, oh wow, look, they haven't even changed the calendar from last month. Or, gee, that picture's really old, or whatever. And the temptation is to look at what's produced and how good the thing looks. And of course, there's a very fine balance between that. Huh? Because if you want to operate in the modern world, you need to operate with some efficiency, and you need to use communications that people use. But really, it's our faithfulness which makes us relevant. It's not our size which makes us relevant. It's how we live in the community, how we welcome new people, how we demonstrate what it means to be the hands and the feet of Jesus. Not how many groups we have or how great we look. The second temptation is the evil one saying to Jesus, from the pinnacle of the temple, look down there. I will, or from the precipice rather, look out over the space. I will give you all the kingdoms of the world. I'll give you this authority, he says to Jesus. And it's about power, this temptation is. It's about the systems of power and about being in control, if you like. The temptation to form kingdoms of power is a very strong thing for us as human beings. And the models of success that we have around us point to power, don't they? This is how to look good, and this is how to have power. And we get the model from a whole lot of places. We might get it from home and our parents, but we get it from governments. We get it from business models. I can remember as a younger chap always believing that there was nothing that my father couldn't achieve if he contacted the right person. And there's something about power in that, isn't it? Jesus' model seems to be very different. He says, my power is not of this world. And he, in fact, moves in the opposite direction to amassing a kingdom of power. And he talks about the kingdom of heaven, which you can belong to right now by believing in him. And this is not the kind of kingdom which the people expected, which is why they were disillusioned with him. Because in Jewish understanding, this was going to be a mighty, mighty king, son of David, which he was, and would come in on a stallion with armor and a huge army and take control, as it were. And Jesus does all the opposite of that. It was difficult for people to understand. So then and now, the need to be in control is strong. And I wonder what models the church shows in that often. I would be untrue to myself if I didn't say that I struggle with that sometimes. It's really nice, to be part of the church and especially part of the clergy when you can say, wow, in service number 4 today, I was tired at the end of that. Perhaps Pope Benedict's example of stepping down from the papacy because he says he can't exercise physical and spiritual strength and leadership is a really good one. I mean, trying to say, what does this actually mean for the world? That instead of holding out to the end is maybe a very good example of letting go of control and power. And there are very few examples of service in people, of powerful leadership. Mostly when we see examples of powerful people, they're in control of things. And we teach people in business to be able to be in control. So that's the second. And then the third is the temptation of the evil one saying to Jesus from the pinnacle of the temple, in other words, from a very high place, well, throw yourself down and the angels will swoop in and hold you. And what's that temptation? Mother Teresa once said that, we are not created to be successful, even spiritually successful. We are created to be obedient. And so this is the temptation around success, spiritual success. And I suppose it's the difference between loving ourselves and loving God. Because, when the angels swoop down to save us in full view of everyone, wow, this is going to look good. Or I'm going to look good. Yeah? It's a difficult one in our world because we teach our children about the need to be successful and that they need to learn hard to keep up in our world. Why? Because they need to be successful. And how we make it academically, how we make it dollars per hour, how we make it barrels per day, and how we make it in business monopoly is about success. And there's a very fine balance between success and success. And, unless you have a lot of money and you can withdraw from the world and just do your own thing and say, well, I don't mind, success is not important for me. Well, you try and do that when you have nothing. Much easier to do when you have a lot, because then you can be successful and you don't have to bother about it. So the temptation for spiritual success is also huge. After the World Leadership Summit this year, and I went to the local presentation of the World Leadership Summit, I wrote to the organizers, because it was a brilliant conference, and powerful people in the world, demonstrating, many of them, a fair humility as well, about their leadership style and about what was success and not success. But I wrote to the organizers asking if some of the speakers of the World Leadership Summit in the future could also be from small-sized churches, instead of mega churches of 2,000 to 7,000 people, because almost all the illustrations of the people who speak at that conference are around corporation, mega-sized churches. And they talk about, well, in our church of 5,000 people, in our congregation of 7,000 people, well, it's quite nice to lose yourself in those numbers, especially if you can go to the same church as the president or the secretary of state or the some other really important person. So, there are the temptations. Temptation to look good, the temptation for power, and the temptation for success, especially spiritual success for us. And when Jesus answers them, he doesn't only answer the devil, but he then goes on to live out his answers in a very different way from how his world and our world live them out. There's a little tale of the devil who was transformed into an angel of light, which is one of the great guises of the evil one, to look like an angel of light. And so the devil, transformed into an angel of light, appeared to one of the most holy fathers of the desert and said to him, I'm the angel Gabriel, and I've been sent to thee by the Almighty. And the monk replied, think again. You must have been sent to someone else. I have done nothing to deserve the visit of an angel. And with that, the devil vanished and never again dared to come anywhere near that monk.